He was fired from the company he helped build. Now he's reshaping an entire industry, not for revenge but for redemption. Discover how Garrett Walsh turned exile into empire in this 4-part journey through betrayal, resilience, and the quiet power of integrity. Garrett Walsh sat at the head of the long, gleaming mahogany conference table, the ambient lighting casting subtle reflections off its polished surface. The room was silent except for the ticking of a sleek chrome clock on the wall and the rustle of papers as executives shuffled their notes. Everyone at Oaken Light Publishing's quarterly meeting was waiting for Veronica Slate, the new CEO, to begin. Garrett, the company's long-standing director of client strategy, had been in this exact seat for more than a decade. He knew every corner of this room, from the glass art installations to the coffee stains on the carpet by the assistant's chair, but today, everything felt different. He tried to ignore the looks exchanged around the table. Veronica's presence had changed the atmosphere since the day she was installed by the board 6 months ago. Her digital-first strategy had been sweeping, her language full of disruption and innovation, and her vision unapologetically corporate. Garrett, with his old-school focus on relationship building and long-form trust, had slowly found himself edged out of key meetings, copied less on emails, and increasingly treated like a relic. "Let's begin," Veronica said briskly, her crisp blazer unwrinkled despite the tension in the room. Her voice carried power, trained and deliberate. What followed was a series of financial updates, future projections, and euphemisms that hinted at structural reorganization. Then it came. A recommendation to sunset Garrett's department and shift client relationship responsibilities to a centralized digital CRM task force. The words were sterile, but the meaning was razor-sharp. Garrett kept his expression neutral. He'd seen corporate coups before, quiet, strategic eliminations disguised as modernization. He nodded slowly and when prompted said only, "Understood." The meeting moved on, but inside, Garrett felt something crack, not from betrayal, but from clarity. He'd given this company everything. It was time to let go. Later that night, Garrett stood in his apartment overlooking downtown Indianapolis. The city lights blurred behind the condensation on his window. His phone buzzed. Jacob Levine, his longtime colleague and friend, had texted, "You didn't deserve that." "You know that, right?" Garrett replied. It was always going to happen this way. He sat down at his desk, pulled out a leather-bound notebook and began to write. Not a resignation. Not yet. Just ideas. Thoughts that had been percolating for years, but now demanded action. Independent publishing. A collective model. Real collaboration. A system where relationships, not metrics, were the currency. He didn't know if it would work, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was planning something worth building. The formal termination came 2 weeks later. Severance. NDAs. The usual legal scaffolding meant to soften a professional blow that was anything but soft. Garrett accepted it all with grace. Veronica didn't meet with him directly. Instead, an HR representative delivered the news and wished him well. Garrett shook hands, walked out of the Oaken Light building, and didn't look back. He drove to Eagle Creek Park and sat by the water for hours. No tears, no rage, just silence and resolve. That night, he made his first call to Thomas Franklin. "Thomas," Garrett said when the familiar voice answered, "I'm thinking of building something. Not just another publishing house, something different. Are you interested in hearing about it?" "Of course," Thomas replied. "For you? Always." In the weeks that followed, Garrett outlined his plan. A consortium of independent publishers. A network, rather than a hierarchy. Shared resources, marketing channels, and a common digital infrastructure. No overlords, just equals. He rented a modest co-working space in Broad Ripple. Just one desk, a coffee machine, and a whiteboard filled with scribbles and arrows. It wasn't much, but it was his. He reached out to former clients, but never solicited. He offered conversations, not pitches. Some were hesitant, others intrigued. Most were frustrated with Oaken Light's new direction. Then something changed. Eleanor Jenkins of Riverstone Press signed on, and then Thomas Franklin. By the end of the first month, 5 more. The Walsh Publishing Consortium was real. Garrett hired 2 employees, a bright-eyed marketing graduate named Zoe, and a semi-retired logistics manager, Martin, who brought old-school wisdom with zero ego. Every day, Garrett worked side by side with them. No executive suite, no separation. The first internal newsletter went out. Then the shared platform launched. By the end of the 3rd month, the publishing world had begun to whisper, "What is Walsh building?" Oaken Light noticed. Veronica noticed. But Garrett didn't flinch. He didn't look back. Because he had already seen the future, and it wasn't in skyscrapers or shareholder calls. It was in people, in trust. In a simple but radical idea, publishing done right. 2 weeks after the board's surprise proposition, Garrett Walsh sat alone in the modest second-floor office of a converted brownstone in Broad Ripple. Outside, the leaves had begun their slow shift into autumn colors, and the cool Indiana breeze curled through an open window. The building, with its creaking wood floors and exposed brick walls, couldn't have been more different from the glass and steel monolith of Oaken Light Publishing's downtown headquarters. But it felt right. It felt real. Garrett had turned down Harold Blackwood's offer to return, even after the board sweetened the deal with a higher compensation package, bonuses, and an implied promise of full authority. That conversation had left a bitter taste in his mouth. They hadn't offered it because they believed in him. They offered it because their financial metrics were collapsing, and worse, they needed a hatchet man to undo what Veronica Langford had built. He didn't want revenge, he wanted change. Instead of returning to salvage a sinking ship, Garrett made 3 calls. First, to Thomas Franklin of Franklin Press, then to Eleanor Jenkins at Riverstone Press, and finally, to his attorney Benjamin, to ensure that everything he planned was legal. By the end of the week, the Walsh Publishing Consortium was born, a cooperative of independent publishers pooling resources, sharing distribution networks, leveraging market data, and maintaining autonomy. The idea was radical in its simplicity. Strip away the corporate layers and put the relationships back at the center of publishing. Within the first month, they had 7 founding members. Each brought their unique catalog and clientele, contributing to a shared fund that covered the initial infrastructure and Garrett's modest salary. There was no CEO. Garrett didn't want a title. He was the facilitator, the connector, the one who listened and brought people together. They leased a small space on the edge of the Arts District and hired 2 employees. One was a recent communications grad named Chelsea, energetic and fluent in digital strategy. The other, Margaret Maggs Holder, was a semi-retired operations veteran who'd forgotten more about book logistics than most people would ever learn. Maggs kept the trains running. Chelsea made sure people knew about it. What they didn't do was poach clients. Garrett was meticulous about that. He never approached Oaken Light's clients directly. But word spread. Independent publishers, frustrated by Veronica's relentless focus on automation and data-driven algorithms, began knocking. And when they saw what Garrett had built, a community rather than a hierarchy, they joined. By the 2nd month, they moved into a larger space in a converted warehouse in Fountain Square. The building smelled of fresh paint and ambition. Garrett walked the halls every morning, greeting people by name, sitting in on planning sessions, absorbing their challenges. Then came the call from Jacob Miller. "They know what you're doing," Jacob said one evening. "Veronica's livid. She's threatening legal action." Garrett stood in the window of his office, looking out at the line of trees beginning to turn gold. "We haven't violated anything," he said calmly. "That won't stop her from trying." "There's a board meeting tomorrow," Jacob continued. "It's going to be rough." "That's not my concern anymore, Jacob." Jacob hesitated. "I wanted to ask if there's room for one more." "I've reached my limit here." Garrett smiled. "Come by the office. We'll talk." The next day, the quarterly earnings call confirmed what Garrett had suspected. Oaken Light's revenue had dropped 45%. Their stock plummeted 17% in a single day. Thomas texted Garrett from the meeting room. She's blaming market disruption. No mention of the clients she drove away. Then came the unexpected call. "Mr. Walsh?" A clipped voice said on the line. "This is Patricia Harrington from the Oaken Light Board." "Yes. I'm calling to inform you we're waiving your non-compete agreement effective immediately. We're also preparing a cease regarding interference with our client relationships." Garrett let the silence stretch. "Have you spoken to Thomas?" Franklin, to Eleanor Jenkins, sat down and asked why they left. "That's not relevant." "It's the only thing that's relevant," he cut in. "They didn't leave because I started something new. They left because Oaken Light stopped valuing what mattered." There was a pause. "The board is still in session. Perhaps you'd care to join us?" "I appreciate the invitation," Garrett replied, "but I'm in a meeting with 15 publishers who've already chosen a different path." The cease never came. 3 days later, the Indianapolis Star ran the headline, "Oaken Light CEO steps down amid financial turbulence." Within 6 months, the Walsh Publishing Consortium had expanded to 23 member publishers, with a waiting list of others. They'd moved into permanent offices, and Garrett found himself on panels at national conferences. Publishers Weekly called it a grassroots revolution. The New York Times featured a piece titled, "The Relationship Renaissance in Publishing." Garrett didn't care about the accolades. What mattered was that the people who'd been silenced, overlooked, and marginalized were now part of something real, something sustainable. On a Tuesday morning, Harold called again. "We'd like to discuss the possibility of Oaken Light joining the consortium," he said without preamble. Garrett didn't hesitate. "That's not how it works, Harold." "Perhaps a partnership. I'll bring it to our council," Garrett said, already knowing the answer. The members wouldn't go for it. Oaken Light had become everything they'd left behind. Later that day, Garrett drove to Eagle Creek Park, the place he used to go when things got too heavy. The water was calm, the sky streaked with early autumn clouds. He sat on the same bench he had sat on 6 months ago, only this time, he wasn't seeking answers. He had them. This hadn't been about vengeance. It had been about vision. Garrett didn't need a corner office or a corporate title to prove his worth. He had built something better, something human. Sometimes being fired is the best thing that can happen to you, because it forces you to build what should have existed all along. The first few weeks after we formed the Walsh Publishing Consortium were a blur of activity. Our tiny office buzzed with energy. The recycled desks didn't match, the Wi-Fi was spotty, and the coffee machine sputtered like it had lived several past lives. But none of it mattered. We were building something from the ground up, and that gave us a sense of purpose corporate perks never could. Garrett Walsh had become a name people whispered in industry circles, sometimes with admiration, sometimes with suspicion. But Garrett didn't care about the chatter. He had a vision and finally the freedom to execute it on his terms. The team was small but potent. Megan, our recent grad, had a gift for digital communication and storytelling. She created a newsletter that started gaining traction, her style informal and witty, exactly what our community of independent publishers needed. Dan, our operations veteran, moved like clockwork. He kept our schedules aligned, our budgets in check, and our feet on the ground when excitement risked pulling us too far into idealism. We'd grown to a 9-member publishing company by October. Garrett made it a point to sit down with every single one, listening more than speaking. They didn't want someone to lead them. They wanted someone to connect the dots, and he was damn good at that. By mid-month, we were prepping for the Chicago SUR Publishing Summit. The event wasn't just a conference, it was a stage. Our consortium would officially debut there with a modest booth and a panel featuring 3-member publishers. Garrett had no intention of taking the spotlight, but the rest insisted. "People want to hear from you," Eleanor Jenkins had said over Zoom. "You're the architect. Step up." He did. The panel was packed, standing room only. Garrett sat between Eleanor and Thomas Franklin, letting them speak first, sharing their reasons for joining the consortium. The audience, mostly jaded industry veterans and wide-eyed newcomers, leaned in closer as the stories poured out. Lost relationships, corporate tunnel vision, ignored client needs. Then Garrett spoke. Publishing isn't just about platforms or digital reach, he began. It's about people, editors, agents, authors, booksellers, working in rhythm, not against each other. Somewhere along the way, we started trading relationships for algorithms. We forgot what made this industry human. A beat of silence followed, then applause, genuine and loud. After the panel, representatives from 10 different publishing houses came to inquire about joining. Most were disillusioned mid-sized firms and some still technically contracted with Oak and Light. "Is there room for us?" one asked. "There's always room for people who remember why we do this," Garrett replied. Back in Indianapolis, their modest Broad Ripple office no longer sufficed. By late November, they moved into a former textile warehouse in Fountain Square, airy, open, filled with light, a place to grow. Jacob joined them the same week. He resigned from Oak and Light with no fanfare and no 2-week notice. "Thought you could use someone who understands Veronica's game from the inside," he'd said, rolling in a whiteboard in his laptop. They did. Veronica's position at Oak and Light had started to wobble. The quarterly losses sparked investor unrest. Her strategy of prioritizing digital distribution while gutting editorial teams had backfired spectacularly. Sales had slumped, especially among legacy clients who valued nuance over automation. One afternoon, Garrett and Jacob sat across from each other, drafting a proposal for a shared author retention program. Garrett paused, noticing Jacob's distraction. "Something on your mind?" Jacob nodded. "She's going to come after us. Hard. Legally. Maybe even personally." "She already has," Garrett replied, calmly sliding a document across the table. Jacob scanned the paper. Oak and Light's desist. He frowned. "And?" I let it sit. Then I responded with one question. "Have you spoken to the clients who left?" "They haven't. They won't." Jacob smiled. "Then she's lost, already." As December rolled in, momentum accelerated. Megan launched a podcast called Ink and Intention, interviewing authors, editors, and publishers from the consortium. The audience doubled with every episode. Their message wasn't polished. It was real. The week before Christmas, Garrett received a certified letter. Oak and Light had formally dropped the non-compete clause from his termination. It was a white flag, but not a surrender. Then came the real twist. Patricia Harrington called again. "We'd like to explore options for Oak and Light to join the consortium," she said. "Perhaps as a strategic partner." Garrett stared at the skyline outside his window, the gray winter light casting long shadows over Fountain Square. "That's not how we work, Patricia." "Then let's discuss a merger," Garrett cut her off. "The publishers who joined us came to escape what Oak and Light became. You don't fix trust by rebranding it. You fix it by earning it." The line went quiet. "We're not looking for redemption," Patricia said finally. "Then you're not ready to join us." He ended the call. Later that night, Garrett visited Eagle Creek Park again. The lake was still, moonlight shimmering over its surface. It was the place he always went to reflect, and this time, he wasn't asking himself how to fix something broken. He was thinking about how to preserve something growing. They'd just hit 20-member publishers. More were inquiring every week. The momentum wasn't just exciting, it was fragile. The moment they forgot why they started, it would all fall apart. Garrett sat on the same bench he used to sit on when everything had seemed hopeless. Now it felt like a beginning. And it was. January arrived with wind that cut through the brick walls of the Fountain Square office and snow that blanketed the sidewalks outside. Inside, though, the Walsh Publishing Consortium thrived with a warmth that didn't come from the thermostat. It came from a purpose. Garrett Walsh's days had become longer, but he didn't mind. He wasn't battling corporate metrics anymore. He was shaping something organic, something resilient. Every morning he arrived early, made coffee for the team, and walked through the growing bullpen to check in with people personally. It wasn't leadership by command. It was leadership by connection. The consortium now boasted 23 member publishers. They'd expanded into Ohio, Michigan, and Illinois. Megan's podcast, Ink and Intention, hit national charts. Thomas Franklin and Eleanor Jenkins started mentoring newer members. Dan was finalizing a partnership with a university press in Minnesota. They weren't just holding their own, they were redefining what success looked like in publishing. But with success came new pressures. A major investor-backed publishing group approached Garrett in late January. They wanted to acquire the consortium and leverage its innovation. The offer was substantial, high 7 figures, with equity, titles, and guaranteed board positions. Garrett didn't even consider it. He didn't tell the team until after he declined. "Because what we're building here can't be bought," he explained at their Friday roundtable. "And it sure as hell isn't for sale." The team applauded, not out of obligation, but out of shared belief. Still, pressure took other forms. In February, Oaken Light launched a counter-consortium, the Aurora Group. Marketed as a new wave of publishing freedom, it was built on slick branding, high-end technology, and former PR firms rebranded as collaborative leaders. But Garrett knew better. "A wolf in cooperative clothing," he said to Jacob, reviewing Aurora's website. "What do we do?" Jacob asked. "Nothing," Garrett replied. "We keep showing up, and we keep doing the work." That work included a mid-March gathering in Louisville. All 23 consortium publishers came in person, a first since their founding. It wasn't a conference. It was a campfire. They met in a historic library turned event space, a metaphor that didn't go unnoticed. For 2 days they shared best practices, swapped stories, argued, laughed, and sketched visions on paper napkins. Garrett opened the event with one line: "We are what we keep choosing to be. Together." The phrase stuck. Eleanor had it printed on mugs. Megan used it as the closing for every podcast episode. Dan began including it in the footer of their newsletters. April brought bittersweet news. Veronica was gone. She resigned under mounting pressure from Oaken Light's board. The company's revenue had dropped again, and Aurora was failing to lure back defectors. In her place, the board appointed an interim CEO, someone Garrett remembered from his early years. A decent man. "A quiet fixer," Harold Blackwood called again. "Things are evolving. The new CEO would like to speak with you, not about joining, but about learning." Garrett agreed to a call, not out of spite or pride, but out of curiosity. The conversation was respectful. The new CEO, Robert Lang, asked good questions. He didn't talk, he listened. "Would you ever consider consulting?" Lang asked finally. "I'll think about it," Garrett said. The truth was he already had. He wasn't interested in saving Oaken Light, but he was interested in helping others learn what they had forgotten. Relationships matter more than revenue charts. May brought new voices. The consortium welcomed 4 more publishers. One specialized in LGBTQ+ literature, another in translated works from Southeast Asia. The ecosystem was widening, and that made Garrett proud. At the year's half mark, they celebrated with a quiet dinner in Fountain Square. No stage, no speeches, just plates passed around and stories told like family. Jacob raised a toast to Garrett, who got fired so we could all get free. Everyone laughed, but Garrett simply smiled. "I didn't get fired," he said. "I got redirected." That night, walking home through the soft glow of downtown street lamps, Garrett passed by the building where Oaken Light's Indianapolis office once stood. It was dark now, closed for renovations. He paused, not in bitterness, but in reflection. There had been a time he thought his identity was tied to that building, to that name. But now, standing under the stars, he knew better. Legacy wasn't about logos or letterhead. It was about people, about trust, about having the courage to start again with nothing but belief, and that was exactly what he'd done.